Hello, beautiful mama. Welcome to Navigating Motherhood with Confidence. I'm Dr. Sarah Hardy, naturopathic doctor, mother, and creator of VitalityNaturalHealth.ca. This program supports informed, intuitive mothering by providing reliable information on a variety of family health topics and featuring mums who are nourishing their connection with their inner wisdom and integrating it into real life every day. In episode 9, I'm chatting with Dr. Jennifer Salib Huber. Dr. Jenn is a naturopathic doctor, a mother of 3, and is with us to share her wisdom about parenting our picky eaters.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to this episode of Navigating Motherhood with Confidence. I'm really thrilled to welcome a colleague of mine here in Dartmouth, Nova Scotia, Dr. Jenn Salib Huber, to chat with us about parenting our picky eaters. Welcome, Jenn.
Thank you. I'm very excited to be here.
Jenn, just before we get started with asking some questions and that sort of thing, I'm wondering if you might tell us a little bit about what started you on this journey or why you feel called to support parents with picky eaters.
Okay, so I'm a parent to 3 kids, and I always say that it was my interest in baby-led weaning that really got me interested in kind of finding ways to break free of that picky eating label and to really encourage parents and kids to develop healthy relationships with food, and not just about the types of food, but also the behaviors around food and eating. So my oldest child, who's going to be 9, my daughter, who's going to be 9 in July, we got started with baby-led weaning with her because she wasn't particularly interested in being spoon-fed. So she was one of those kids that at exactly 6 months, I approached her with a spoon of homemade pureed baby food that I'd spent 2 months filling my freezer with, only to find out that she wanted to eat, but she did not want to be spoon-fed at all. So once we kind of broke through that barrier, and that was kind of how I got interested in learning more about baby-led weaning and started that journey, she started to go through her own kind of typical, very normal food behavior for a 2 and a 3-year-old with, I only want to eat this and I don't ever want to eat this again. And it has to be all crackers all the time or only blueberries all the time. My husband and I have a really distinct memory of being on a plane to Ottawa where we had packed about 4 pints of blueberries for our trip up and had to find a place to buy blueberries for the trip back because it was the only thing that would occupy her. So, kind of just going through those experiences with my own child and talking to parents and having them come in and say, okay, do I need to worry about this? Because this is all Johnny is eating. Really got me exploring not only kind of the research around what exactly is picky eating, when do we worry, when do we not worry, but also just about how can we redefine that relationship? And as we start to learn more about other cultures, about how French children aren't picky eaters. So what are we doing differently, or what can we be doing differently to make it a better experience for everyone? So that's kind of how I got started on it initially.
Yeah. And I think, so much of what we do revolves around food and around meal times and
absolutely
what we sort of see as healthy eating habits or what our kids should be eating. And when those things don't match up with exactly what they're eating, it sort of gets our minds rolling. Like, could there be something wrong? If there's something wrong, what do I do?
Exactly.
All those sorts of things. Can you give us a little bit of an idea of sort of the difference between a normal phase in that process and maybe some flags or signs that we might want to be aware of to be asking for more help?
Absolutely. So I think, Emery, your little guy has probably gone through lots of phases like that. And most kids do. It's the exception rather than the rule to have a child who goes through their life without going through periods of strong preferences. And we see that not only with food. So again, my oldest daughter, with the Christmas that she was turning, or the year that she was turning 3, she got a princess dress for Christmas and she wore it for 42 consecutive days, day in, day out. And we see that even now at 6. My son is very much, he has his 5 favorite shirts. So they become attached to things for various reasons, and food is just sometimes, what's in their field of vision. So it's very normal and typical for toddlers and young children to eat a lot of food at one meal and nothing at the next. So as they go through growth spurts, as they go through different phases, they may eat a whole heck of a lot of food and seem to be enjoying it with gusto, and then decide that they're going to reject it, that they're not ever going to eat this again. And that's very normal and typical, and not anything that any parent should lose sleep over.
Right. Normal and typical, and often frustrating for parents.
Exactly. But one of the things that I talk to parents about, and I'm a work in progress. Everything that I talk about is not something that we do perfectly at all meals, but it's something that I try and remind myself of, that I really shouldn't assign value to whether they eat or not, and I shouldn't teach them to assign value to whether they eat or not. Eating is like breathing; it is an instinct, and we need it to survive. While we should enjoy it, and just like we should enjoy the feeling of a nice, deep, full belly breath, we shouldn't assign it good or bad. So we should not have to worry when our child is not eating, unless that is more than just the typical, oh, Johnny didn't eat supper today, or Johnny had 2 bites of what we were having. Also really common and normal for kids to go through food jags. So, my son, I always use my kids as my sample size of 3, because that's, who I know the most of. But my son ate a peanut butter and jelly sandwich for the better part of 5 years of his life, or not jelly, just peanut butter. That was his thing. And 2 weeks ago decided he didn't want sandwiches anymore. And so hasn't eaten a sandwich since. Now that was a particularly long food jag, but lots of kids will go through, I'm only eating this food for every meal for several days. And again, that is normal and typical. And I would just like everything else that seems sometimes toddler-esque, just notice it, just go with it, and know that it will probably pass. And like with what's the word I'm looking for? Growth spurts. A lot of times toddlers will seem to eat nonstop from the time that they wake up until the time they go to bed. And that is also very typical, and then can go days where they seem to be living on air. So these are all normal and typical toddler, preschool, or even early child behaviors that I would encourage any parent to not lose any sleep over. Sometimes we do need to worry, and that's more when we're worrying that it's more than the usual kind of picky eating phase or selective eating phase. Any time that a child eliminates an entire food group for an extended period of time. So very common, again, for toddlers to either shun or love meat. That seems to be one that really goes one way or the other, and parents frequently worry about protein intake. And as long as they're not, they haven't shunned it for the rest of their life, or milk products or higher dairy products or anything like that, that seems like an entire food group is being eliminated, that would be something that if it went on for more than a month or 2 would probably be something to talk to your provider about. Weight loss. We don't ever want to see kids losing weight. And so if they've become selective enough in their eating that they are actually not taking in enough calories and nutrients to meet their nutritional and developmental growth needs, that's obviously a concern. Nutritional deficiencies. So, if a child has restricted their intake of iron-rich foods enough that they've developed iron deficiency anemia, and if there's any developmental concerns. So if their growth pattern has slowed, if they're having difficulty learning, those would be some of the big red flags. And we do know that there are some special labels, selective eating disorder or avoidant restrictive food intake disorder, that really need to be managed as a team and not just as a parent. So, right. But those are the exception rather than the rule.
Yeah, and so with those exceptions, if we're noticing some of those sort of red flags around some more sort of extreme picky eating, who are the best folks for parents to seek out? I know a lot of us tend to gravitate to Dr. Google, but who might be a better option or a more supportive option for folks to seek out?
Well, the few patients that I've seen who really meet the criteria for this over the years, and this is also newer criteria. We haven't really known about these, the extreme picky eaters, as they're called, for all that long. But typically, it's a team approach. So there would be a speech language pathologist who would be involved, a developmental psychologist, a dietitian, a family doctor, a naturopathic doctor, anybody who can really help that family and that child develop a plan. And sometimes there are definitely kind of proven strategies for helping to remove some of the fear, if fear is at the root of it. Some kids do seem to be super tasters, so finding ways to make food more palatable to their little taste buds. For some kids, it's a sensory issue, so they don't like the smell. So there's a lot involved once that concern has been raised. So it definitely needs to be a team-based approach.
Okay. So those are sort of the exceptions to
Exactly.
the rule, those extreme picky eaters. For the average child, a lot of parents that I meet with have noticed sort of a shift, and they often say, like, I had a really great eater, when he or she was a baby, whether they were doing purees or whether they were doing baby-led weaning, they were trying lots of things. They seemed to love food. They were eating everything that we were eating at meals, and then suddenly they're just eating one thing, or they seem really, really picky. And, why is this?
Well, I think it falls under the realm of developmentally normal. Those same parents, and I've been that parent 3 times, those same parents will notice, oh, this is also the time when, little Jane has started becoming, stranger shy, maybe no longer wants to play with the toys that she wanted to play with, or only wants to wear, certain clothes. So I think it's a time when they start to really develop preferences, and those preferences extend to beyond just food. But because they eat several times a day, and food is the center for many children's lives and many adults' lives, it tends to be the one that's most visible. And because as parents, we really have this, I always joke that, we always have like this deep-seated Italian mother in all of us, that we want our children to eat. We need to feed our children. So even when you know better and try to do better, there's still that moment of panic, like, they didn't eat supper. They're going to go to bed hungry. They're going to wake up in the middle of the night. And so it feels like something that as parents we need to manage, because that's what we do. We're trying to herd them to be, healthy adults. And as part of that is, having them eat. So my philosophy with food really stems from Ellyn Satter's division of responsibility, which, if anyone isn't familiar with Ellyn Satter, she's a registered dietitian in the States who focuses and specializes in feeding. And her, division of responsibility is that it's the parent's job to provide the what and the where, and it's the child's job to decide if and how much. And there was certainly a time in my life when I had this printed and mounted on my fridge, because I needed to remind myself of that every day.
Yeah.
It is so hard not to get frustrated when you have to go out and run errands and you just need them to eat their lunch because you don't want them to be cranky and tired and unmanageable. Like, those are all real parenting problems, but we need to remove our expectations and remove those, expectations from our children when it comes to eating. Because just like when you're nursing a baby, or when you're feeding a baby in whatever way you feed your baby, if they're not hungry, they're not going to eat. So it's really important to say, okay, define the time. So I strongly recommend having a loose definition of when meal times are, but also having some boundaries there. So one problem that I often see with kids who maybe don't eat supper, that's a really common one. It's like, they eat so well at daycare, but then we come home and they don't have anything for supper. And part of that is because daycares often offer a snack in the middle of the afternoon, and then parents pick them up and sometimes have a snack in the car on the way home. So if they've had 2 relatively large snacks, they're probably not going to be super hungry at 5 o'clock or 5:30, when they also may be tired or have had a really busy, fun day and just want to sit down and snuggle. So when everybody sits down at the table, and little Johnny doesn't eat, that can become a stressful time. So really setting, okay, we're not going to snack an hour and a half before our meal time. So if you typically have supper at 5:30 and you pick up your child at 5 o'clock, they can probably last half an hour, if they've had a snack at 3 or 3:30. So setting some boundaries around when you have snacks, because snacking is definitely an impediment to having a healthy appetite and wanting to eat your meal. So that's definitely one of the things I recommend.
Yeah. Awesome. I know I think that having those guidelines, like you say, posted on the fridge,
Yep.
it's such a fantastic reminder to us as parents,
Yep.
that that's our responsibility. Provide those healthy choices, and the time for our little ones to sit down and eat them, and they decide how much and what they're having. Yeah, it's just such a fantastic, lovely reminder. And I love what you mentioned too about expectations, because I feel like as parents, we get our expectations going around what they need to eat to stay healthy all the time and how much time they have to eat. And when those expectations aren't met, that really gets our minds going around, okay, what are the consequences of this? So if Johnny doesn't eat supper, that means that he's going to go to bed hungry, which means he's going to be up in the middle of the night and hungry, which means that we're all going to lose sleep, which means that we're going to be exhausted for tomorrow. And it just kind of keeps rolling and rolling and rolling.
Yes, it really does. And it snowballs. And that expectation of what we think our children should eat often starts as soon as we start with solid foods. So in my baby-led weaning workshops, I talk about how very well-intentioned parents and grandparents play the choo-choo game and the train game and the one more bite game. And we're inadvertently teaching our children to override their satiety signals. They know when they're hungry. They know when they're full. We just need to provide them with the opportunity to nourish themselves. And so if we control of what's offered, they can self-regulate how much to eat. There is no child in North America or anywhere in the world when presented with food when they're hungry that's going to choose not to eat. They just don't have that willpower. So, I really encourage parents to try and let it go and not to worry, not to manage the day to day. And I think sometimes. When kids are in daycare and they receive this menu of what they've eaten over the day, and the parents are like, oh my goodness, they eat so much during the day. Why aren't they eating enough at supper? It may be that they're getting 90% of their nourishment there, and that's okay. It doesn't have to be 3 square meals and 2 snacks in order to be a complete and balanced day. It can be whatever works for that child. But the boundaries and the expectations need to be set out by the parents. And so as long as everybody knows their job, then it's okay. So in our house, we usually eat supper between 5 and 5:30, and they do go to an after-school program where they often have a snack that sometimes they eat more than others. So in our house, everybody comes to the table whether you're hungry or not. So if you're full and don't feel like eating, you don't have to eat when we eat, but you have to sit with us. And supper will stay on the table until 6:30 or 6:45. So that sometimes means that we've gotten up and left, and somebody will come back and finish their supper. There's no judgment there. There's no value. It's just if you're hungry, you'll eat. And if you're not, well, you can have breakfast in the morning. Right. Yeah. So, and it's a low pressure thing. And like I said, it's a work in progress, and some days are better than others, but that's the intention, and we try and live that.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So, beyond shifting our expectations as parents and setting those boundaries around mealtime, do you have any other tips or suggestions around sort of avoiding those mealtime wars?
Absolutely. The biggest one is to really start early. So if a lot of these things that we talk about, like not using food as currency, don't use food as reward. We all celebrate with birthday cake on our birthday, and that's an okay expectation, but you don't want to entice a child to eat their supper so that they can have a cookie afterwards. They will never choose to eat broccoli in order to get a cookie every time without a battle, and you will constantly have to present that reward. So again, going back to Ellyn Satter's division of responsibility, and also her, philosophy around, kind of treat foods, is that when they're offered, the child should be allowed to eat them whenever they want. It shouldn't be tied to finishing a meal or not finishing a meal. So we do dessert on Friday night. That's kind of our family ritual. And we don't place expectations on how much supper you have to eat, how many bites you have to have. We say we eat until you're full. And for the most part, that works out well. And we've had many times where they've had 3 bites of supper, eaten all of their dessert, and then come back later and finish their supper. So the net result is the same, but they're so excited for whatever that dessert is, that as long as they've had some supper, I try not to place an expectation on how much they should have. So trying not to use food as currency. You don't want to say you can't have this until you eat this, or to also take away. So some parents will say you're not going to get dessert unless you eat all of this. So you just don't want to assign value to a behavior. So you don't want to label, and you also want to avoid labels. So even trying to go so far as to not just not label your child as a picky eater, and trying not to have other people label your child as a picky eater so that it doesn't become a self-fulfilling prophecy. But you also want to avoid necessarily saying that foods are good or bad, right? So, we talk about healthy foods, and we talk about foods having superpowers. So carrots give us night vision, and, those kinds of things. So we try really hard just to focus on healthy, and try and even not to say unhealthy, because if they're exposed to mostly healthy foods most of the time and at home, they will know, and they will learn that, chips and chocolate and ice cream are something that are once in a while foods. You don't necessarily have to make a point of saying that all the time.
Right.
So yeah, not using food as currency, avoiding labeling both foods and behaviors, and don't compare. So if you have more than one child, don't say, oh, why can't you eat like your sister? That kind of thing, because again, then they feel like, well, I'm never going to measure up. I'm never going to, be as good as little Sally. So you just want to avoid assigning value and labels to food and behaviors when it comes to kids. To encourage kids, I really suggest making it fun. And then involving them whenever you can. And so for kids who may be a little bit more hesitant, one of my kids is definitely a little shyer when it comes to trying everything, whether it's, a new play date, a new playground, or a new food. We encourage, why don't you just smell it? What does it smell like? Does it smell like something that you like? Or maybe give it a lick, or maybe just have it sit on your plate. That's okay. Oh, that's great. You want to try a little bit on your plate? That's great. We also, now that our kids are older at almost 6 and 9, encourage self-service. So we try and do what we call kind of serving family style most of the time. So instead of me portioning out how much I think that they should have, we lay everything out, and they're encouraged to put a little bit of everything on their plate, and they can have as much of anything that we've offered. So again, my job is to provide the healthy food, and it's their job to decide if and how much. And that works well, and they get really excited. So we try and do fun things, like last night we had Taco Tuesday, and had all different kinds of veggies to try on their tacos. We do a tortilla soup that they can add all their fixings to. So, whatever you can do to make it fun. And as your kids get older, involve them in the meal planning process. We meal plan on Monday night because I grocery shop on Tuesdays. And I have a Pinterest board when I have all these different, crock pot meals, soups, and recipes to try, favorite recipes. And for younger kids, they can still point to the recipes that they like. And for older kids, you can involve them in the preparation. My 9-year-old now dices most of our onions and vegetables. So anything that you can do to get them involved will, increase their buy-in and take a lot of the fear out of it, because even just the process of picking out a food, touching it at the supermarket, or helping to cut it up increases their sensory experience and their comfort around those new foods. Yeah,
that's fantastic. Another one that I found really helpful too with Emery at 3 is, giving him a couple of different options. So here's the cucumbers for supper. Do you want hummus to dip them in, or do you want salad dressing to dip them in? Or, we'd like to put some vegetables on your plate. Is it going to be cucumbers or carrots tonight?
Yep. And 2 choices is great. You want to avoid 5 choices, right? So just like if you're asking them to pick out a book, you only want them to pick between 2 things. You don't want to give them, too many choices, because then it just becomes really overwhelming. Yeah. Another fun thing that we used to do when the kids were kind of in that 3-4 age range is muffin tin lunches. So we would take, the muffin tin that holds like 6 things, and we would put different things in it. And just that novelty, and dips are great, hummus, salad dressing, whatever it's going to take. They love to dip. We would do yogurt dips for fruit. Anything that you can do to make it more fun and new and fresh is going to go a long way. Yeah. But, along that same vein, you should never go to the point of modifying what you're eating. You should not become a short order cook. They will very quickly catch on to that. And so it all goes back to managing expectations.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And I think too, along with that sort of managing expectations and reminding ourselves as parents that our job is to provide the time to eat and those healthy options, for us to sort of remain calm during that process, because kids are so fantastic at picking up on our energy and mood and emotion. And so if we're worried, if we're stressed, if we're feeling overwhelmed, whether it's about what they're eating or whether it's about something else that's gone on in our day, they're going to sense that. And worry and stress and overwhelm don't help our appetites any.
No, exactly. And, again, that's why when the kids were kind of 2 until about 4, I had Ellyn Satter's Division of Responsibility printed on our fridge. And I needed to remind myself every day. And there were times that they chose not to have supper and they went to bed, and shocker of all shockers, they slept anyway, and they got up and had a really hearty breakfast. And so it's okay. We want them to eat healthy and eat most of the time, but that doesn't mean that we have to go into full-blown 5-alarm panic if they don't. A meal here and there that's missed. And again, it's not as punishment. It's just if you're not hungry and this is what we're having, you'll have to wait until the next time we eat.
Exactly. Awesome. Jen, any final thoughts on parenting our picky eaters before we wrap up?
Well, most of the time, and I would say by most of the time, I mean more than 75% of the time, when a parent comes in and says, here's what my child is eating and here's what they're not eating, and when we go over everything, so we go over how they've grown and, looking at developmentally how they're doing, and just implementing a few of these things, and even just telling the parents it's okay. So taking the stress off of the parents, and giving them some tips and tools, like, having a crunch contest, lay out raw carrots and raw celery and ask them which is the crunchiest. Do things that make it fun will take the stress out for everybody. There's so many expectations, to try that we should be pureeing beets and putting it in our spaghetti sauce to make sure that they're getting those vegetables. That how can parents not think that they're failing at every turn when it comes to food? So as long as you're feeding your child mostly home cooked food most of the time, and trying to make that the least processed and balanced as you can, you're doing a great job. So, seek reassurance if you feel like you need it, but chances are you're doing a great job.
Yeah, exactly. Fantastic.
Yeah. So when I look, I'm in the works of putting together a workshop for the fall here in Dartmouth, and I do lots of consults around picky eating in the office, but I really want to bring this to parents in a group education setting so that other parents can get reassurance from each other that they're not alone, that they're not the only ones who go through this, that pretty much everyone who's had a child has gone through this at some point. And lots of times parents come in wanting strategies for the next child. What can I do differently next time so that we don't have to repeat this kind of stressful situation?
Yeah, fantastic. So for folks who are listening in or watching, keep an eye out for Jen's announcements. Her website is pillarsofhealth.ca, and I'll include a link, Jen, under the video.
Thank you.
So that folks have that, and so keep an eye out for those announcements for those local workshops. And I mean, any kind of gathering that creates that kind of community for parents around any parenting challenge that comes up, I find is so helpful for folks, because a lot of times, like you say, it's completely normal part of the process, and we just need that reassurance as parents that that's the case, and it's nice to hear from others.
Yeah, exactly.
Awesome.
Great, thank you so much.
All right, my dear. Take good care. Thank you so much for joining us, and I'm sure that we'll be talking soon.
Great. Have a good day. Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you for joining us today, beautiful mama. For additional resources to nourish the connection with your inner wisdom, visit vitalitynaturalhealth.ca and sign up for the Navigating Motherhood with Confidence free 21-day program. It guides you through a variety of practices and the ways you can integrate them into your life every day. With love, until next time.